Hi, everyone. We're going to give a few minutes for people to join the session and then get started. All right, as everyone's filtering in, I'm going to go ahead and do the intro session. So we will be headed in the right direction when everybody is able to get on. We changed our session time today, so hopefully this works for a lot of people. All right. Hello and welcome to Emerging Opportunities in Indian Manufacturing. I'm your moderator, Carolyn Schmidt. And in today's webinar, we will be discussing Indian manufacturing and the benefits of considering it as part of your supply chain or transitioning to the region. We'll start out as usual with a 20 to 25-minute presentation and host a Q&A session afterwards. So feel free to put your questions, anything that comes up either during the session or that you have prior, into the QA tab, and we will answer as many of them as we can. We'll stay on after the 30-minute session to continue answering questions if we do see a lot of people that have things that they're curious about. Just in general, I want to talk a little bit about our company, Gembah, before we dive in. Gembah is a platform of vetted product experts that guide the entire product journey from concept to market. And we can help relocate your existing supply chain to regions, manage your existing supply chain with our local experts, which we have two of right here. So I want to introduce our two experts today, Benjamin Hopwood, Head of Supply Chain, and Anantveer Agarwal, Director of Production for Central Asia at Gembah. Benjamin is a global leader in supply chain management across product production, leading teams in China, Mexico, India, which is salient today, Vietnam, and Thailand. And he has over 15 years of global product development and manufacturing and is experienced on global supply chain diversification. Anantveer heads up our Gembah's operation in Central Asia region, and he translates product vision and objectives into reality. He has over 12 years of experience with manufacturing and supply chain in the region. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Benjamin.
Thanks so much, Caroline. So as she mentioned at Gembah, we're really excited about creation. Really for our teams, what we do is about empowering. And it's something that we work with throughout our expert network as well as our vendor network all over the world to really make sure that happens. Today, we're going to be talking about India, very excited to do that. If we were to go back to January of this year, we had a webinar that talked very briefly about some of the regions that we operate in, and India was one of the ones that we talked about. So some of the things we were discussing at the time was just that India is a great place for labor-intensive processes. With the labor rates the way they are, it means that it's a very, very attractive destination at this point. Second one was that we're seeing rapid growth within the manufacturing sector, especially with regards to products that have needs in the high tech and automated side. We're seeing lots of automation work that's happening there, and we'll be discussing that a little bit more today. And then the final piece that we looked at was the fact that India requires a bit higher in the realm of order quantities oftentimes. But that said, we really wanted to kind of start out our webinar today to discuss, when we think about India, where was it? Where is it today? How did we get there? In some ways, there's some similarities to China that people can draw, where we do see this significant move in manufacturing that's happening. But it's interesting. For India, a very, very large agricultural area. Sector. And so a lot of the manufacturing was in that, as well as in things like textiles. But today, why is it that we're seeing the movement into manufacturing? A lot of it is that India, as many of you know, if we were to go back to the 90s and early 2000s, that really started to go through a revolution in the area of IT, where we had a very large English-speaking workforce, which then started to build out a lot of middle class types of jobs, which has then led to a lot of consumption internally. And from that consumption, we're actually seeing a lot of Indian factories that are now really starting to provide for that. And as they do it, we're also seeing significant strides in the area of exports. And so it's an interesting situation for India as a country, and it's one that we're seeing unique opportunities that we're excited to talk to you about. So with that said, I'll go ahead and turn it over to my colleague Anantveer, who will be talking in more depth. He's on the ground in India, part of our team and he directs all of our projects that are going on out there. So Anantveer, with that, turn it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Benjamin. And first of all, a very good morning. And thank you so much for everyone who's able to be a part of this webinar today. My name is Anantveer Agarwal, and I'm the Director of Production for Gembah at Central Asia. Continuing the conversation from where Ben left off, I'd like to give all of you just a very brief, high-level understanding of the business and the economic environment in India today. India is currently undergoing a significant retail and e-commerce boom that we're witnessing today, which is primarily fueled by the rising purchasing power of India's middle class and upper middle class sectors of the population, which is estimated at about 1.3 billion people today. So when we see this kind of a move in retail and e-commerce, it naturally brings about innovations in services such as inland logistics that are very critical and key aspects of manufacturing, whether it's manufacturing for the domestic business or also for the export sector. Now, this shift in consumption within the domestic space in India is primarily being brought about by the tier 2 and the tier 3 cities in India. Sorry, there are several MNCs from a wide range of industries that have shown massive interest in setting up world-class manufacturing facilities in India to cater not only to the export markets, but also to the domestic markets. And this would not have been possible if we had not seen the government intervening and helping to push the manufacturing sector in India. There are a number of things that have led to where we are today in India. And some of the key things that I'd like to highlight in our conversation today is that is the government's role, of course, in pushing India. So one of the key things there is the Make in India push by the government of India today. The government has brought about massive business-friendly reforms and incentives to attract foreign direct investment in manufacturing companies in India. Now, one such example I would like to give you guys is the PLI, which is also known as the Production Linked Incentive Scheme. This majorly affects 10 sectors of manufacturing in India, where the incentives total up to $20 billion. This has basically pushed companies such as Apple, Samsung, some of the largest manufacturers of Apple, which is Foxconn, Pegatron, to enter into India's manufacturing space and set up their manufacturing bases here. So we see increased activity in not only the mobile manufacturing, but electric, pharma, and medical device manufacturing industries, where high-tech and large investments are coming into India. Another reason for this is also the government of India cutting down corporate taxes from 25% to 15% in the recent years, which has led to higher disposable income and higher investment in manufacturing in turn. This basically means that India is out there and it is a hot space for investment, for future investment in manufacturing. And one great example would be a very famous brand, or rather very famous toy manufacturing brands, such as the likes of Hasbro and Lego, very big toy makers well known around the world, have recently announced their investment plans in India to set up massive manufacturing units that will cater to not only their export markets, but they have also decided to benefit from the domestic market in India due to the rising consumer demand in India. For example, Hasbro just recently launched, I'm sure most of you are aware of Monopoly Deal, which is a very famous card game. So they've So they've launched that in the local vernacular, which is Hindi, which has been greatly accepted and highly successful. So these are some of the things that are currently happening in India. Investors and foreign companies are looking towards India not only to set up the manufacturing base long term, but some of them are also tapping in to the very attractive domestic market opportunities in India, which basically is the fourth largest retail market in the world, estimated at about $1.5 trillion by 2030. And Amazon, Flipkart, Snapdeal are some of the biggest players in the e-commerce market. They have covered 100% of the ground when it comes to, let's say, the pin codes in India. They're servicing 100% of the pin codes in India. They're reaching out to the masses. The rural people, people in the rural areas and urban areas are their access to internet fueled by the fact that today in India there is a smartphone in every single household, which means every person is able to access the internet and become an end consumer. So the demand for consumer products has rapidly increased. Now, why are we discussing this? The reason to discuss this and bring this up today is that we need to understand that um, the growth in manufacturing in India is not only driven by export demand, but it is also fueled greatly by the internal demands of the people of India and the internal. So when we look at overseas clients investing in India, um, their long-term dependency or dependability on manufacturers in India is greatly justified by the fact that it is not only it is a stable growth, not only fueled by external factors, but also the domestic production in India. Moving on, if we take a greater look, if you take a deeper look into what's into some of the key advantages of moving bases to a different country altogether. I'm sure there are a number of advantages when one looks at choosing a country for setting up the manufacturing bases. But some of the key and most relevant factors that I wanted to highlight today, and one of them would be the extremely low and competitive labor costs that we're seeing in India today. India has a large pool of 500 plus million laborers, and an estimated less than $2 an hour is the labor rate in India, which is really something that we used to see in China in the late 90s. And this is, if you compare these labor rates to those of other Southeast Asian countries like China and Vietnam, it is at 30% of what we're seeing in China and Vietnam. And even if you compare it to Central and South America, it's at 50% of what we're seeing there. Now, on the one hand, we are seeing low labor costs, but on the other hand, I'd also like to highlight this, that some of the largest manufacturers, in fact, the mid and the large segments in the manufacturing space, are also significantly and consistently investing in their technology and automation. Why I say this is from my own example, from my own experiences. Very recently, we've had a factory in Tirupur, which is Tirupur is basically in the southern part of India. It is a major manufacturing hub for textiles in India, and perhaps a large competitor in the textile space in the Asia region. It's got factories that are completely vertically integrated. From the fiber, converting it to the end product is all done under one roof. So we've had a factory in India very recently voluntarily investing in 10 automated sewing machines that they imported from Singapore for one of Gembah's very premium clients. This goes to show that India is committed, and India is committed towards not only enhancing its own technology and automation capabilities, but also really working with groups in India and overseas to really deliver that kind of quality that is demanded by the market today. Another key thing, in fact, is the access and independence of a country to raw material. Now, raw material is really the base of manufacturing, and if you take a couple of examples of textiles or let's say stainless steel, India is one of the largest producers of cotton and jute in the world today, and it is also the second largest producer of silk if you look at it in the textile space. 95% of the world's handloom fabric comes from India. Now, we are also seeing a major shift towards technical textiles in the whole textile space. Now, one such example of India trying to be the next manufacturing hub for the world is that the government of India has recently removed the anti-dumping duties on PTA. Now, PTA is a key ingredient for the manufacturing of man-made fibers, which are also known as technical textiles. So this is just a small example of how India is moving towards being independent in not only procuring its own raw materials, but also sourcing it, or rather manufacturing the raw material in its own landscape. If you talk about aluminum or steel, India is the second largest producer of steel in the world. And it's not just steel or aluminum, which you may argue is produced by other Asian countries as well. India has also consistently grown its production of value added metals, such as stainless steel or extruded aluminum. So we see that India understands that the raw material independence is one of the key factors that is going to play a pivotal role in its lead in becoming the manufacturing hub of the world in the near future. The last thing that I'd like to highlight is what communication looks like with people in India, and also how India has a great resource of engineering talent that perhaps the world can tap into. Now, I'm sure most of you have the opinion that it's probably slightly difficult to communicate with India because of its geographical location and language barriers. But oddly so, India is the second largest English-speaking population in the entire world, which means you can possibly assume seamless communication with Indians, which happens mostly through email communications, and this has vastly changed from what it used to be in the last 15 years. The last thing is the vast majority. I mean, when you think of India, I'm sure most of you assume that the person might be an engineer. Now, I won't blame you, because that's in most cases that's true, because the India has a very large population of engineers and STEM graduates, and in fields of mechanical, electrical, as well as textile engineering. So this proves to be highly beneficial for a country that's moving towards becoming a manufacturing hub. That's because low engineering costs are great when we talk about increasing the manufacturing sector overall in the country. The next thing that I'd like to speak to you guys about today is some of the key industries that are gaining traction in India. Now, most of you must be familiar with the geographical landscape of India, and also that India has a total of 29 different states governed by its own independent parties and political establishments, which means that the investments, even though there is a union government, the investments of the goals and the plans of each state are slightly different. As opposed to China, where we see one or two large clusters of a particular industry, it's slightly different in India, where you will see clusters of industry, but you might see a larger number of those clusters, depending on each individual state's plans and goals to set up manufacturing in their regions. Let's dig into some of the key manufacturing hotspots that are gaining traction today. As I already mentioned, textiles in the south of India is mapped out in the region of Tirupur. This region is basically predominantly manufacturing textiles, from cotton textiles to polyester and nylon, which is gaining a lot of traction around the world today. We have the toy industry, which is highly unorganized as on today, but we have the plush toys hub in the north of India. This region is called Noida, and we have about total toys exports from India currently is 130 million. However, India is significantly investing in large manufacturing locations to be able to cater to the demands of the export market in the toy industry. Another example would be the large-scale jewelry industry that India is very famous for. On the western part of the country, there is a state called Gujarat, which has a city called Surat, which is called the jewelry hub of Asia. This is one of the largest centers for cutting and polishing diamonds, and it spreads like this is the largest industrial cluster in India. There are about 5,000 manufacturing units here, from jewelry to textiles to heavy to heavy metals. We have the south of India is also packed with engineers and engineering companies that manufacture automobile and automotive components and electrical components as well. Now, the growing presence of global automotive OEMs in the Indian manufacturing landscape has significantly increased the localization of their components in this country as well. So we are largely seeing, in the last 2 decades, where a lot of the tooling used to be done abroad is now changed. Now we find that increasingly there are more and more tool manufacturers in India, and this is something that India is now independent of. And this sector, the automobile sector and the engineering part sector, comprises of about 23%. It contributes to the GDP of the country. So this is a very large part of the industrial landscape of India. Now, with that, I thank all of you for lending me your ears, and I'd hand it over to Benjamin.
All right, thanks, Anantveer. So as we move into the next section, logistics in India, what we find is for many of our clients end up coming in and they understand to a degree, how long things will take from China, but there can be a fear around logistics. Also, for those of you who know India well, there's also a number of different kind of critical things to think about. But first, to start on the C side of things, generally speaking, if you're going to be thinking about India, one of the first things that we would recommend would be looking at potentially the difference between travel times between the East and the West Coast. For many people that currently have their manufacturing in East Asia, they've been going through the Western ports on the North American side. If you're going to be working in India, you can still do that. However, from a time standpoint and from a cost standpoint, it's actually much more effective to go in through Eastern ports on the North America side. Also interesting is that currently today we're seeing cheaper prices coming out of India than as compared to like for instance, China, although as you guys know that's been fluctuating heavily. But generally speaking, as a rule of thumb is that you'll be seeing a travel time roughly when we add both internal logistics that are going on trucks and then to sea, we're seeing about 1 week, so about 5 to 10 days additional travel days if you're going to be coming from India versus China, if you're going into the East Coast. In some cases, we're actually seeing it arrive about the same time, especially with port congestion. We're seeing significantly faster delivery times. Although looking forward into the next few years, we would still see that as about 5 days slower. If you're going into the West Coast, then you're going to be at a solid 10 days to potentially 15 days slower as compared to a number of the East Asia ports that you may be going out of. Now, the other piece of this is as we look at the internal logistics in India, is that India is still continuing to work in this area. As you can see on this map, we have a number of main freight corridors that go on. India has highways, especially within the tier 1 cities. We have full logistics capabilities in these areas, both from warehousing standpoint as well as from road surfaces to get there, as well as rail. However, as you start to go into 2nd and 3rd tier cities, the internal logistics within India start to become a much more severe type of situation where you really need to be working with local partners to make sure that you understand exactly how and where your product is moving. Now, with that said, India has also been moving to try and capture a top spot from air logistics. We've been seeing excellent air prices coming out of India. That said, they're also starting to move into some new technologies. And while this is one that we'll have to see if this continues to move forward. As an example, plans are being put together for how drones could really start to affect the overall economy and what that would look like. So we're seeing a lot of progressive movement in that area. But the final part of it is that, you know, when we see this, if you're going to be moving from with air today, you're going to be looking at between $7 and about $9.50 per kilo on this one, per volumetric kilo on that. And so again, while you're not looking at rock bottom prices for it, it's still very comparable to what we're seeing out of other countries. So you have both the sea as well as air options when you're working on it. But the caution that we would have is as you look at logistics internally, getting from your manufacturer to the ports. What are some of the trends? So as was mentioned by Anantveer, some of what we're seeing, if we were to go back, say 5 to 10 years, we saw a lot of special economic zones that got set up. One of the differences that we see is with factories that oftentimes when they're doing an import of material, as long as they have the right certification, that they can actually do import as a special economic entity. And so while you do have zones, you also have the ability for them to get certified to make sure that if you're going to be exporting, that then can be exported. Whereas, for instance, in East Asia, oftentimes you're looking at geographical sectors. But kind of the key thing here was that the special economic zones that were geographically located, one of the challenges that India found was that because the onus was primarily on private investment, that the investment was cut off. And so whereas you saw a number of very large organizations come in and get those zones going, that in a lot of other places, those zones kind of just never really took off. One of the things that's being done recently is the Development Financial Institution, new DFI, that's starting to bring in long-term loans that the manufacturers can begin accessing. So that's been something that's been leading to traction. The second one is that we're seeing strategies come together, as Anantveer mentioned, where companies are really kind of finding their sweet spot in India when they can both match internal domestic consumption with their export. And so whereas this is now drawing very large companies, this is where we would start talking about domestic tariff areas. And this is where they can not only, as they tool up and as they get these larger manufacturers, they can enjoy both export incentives as well as seeing lower tariffs going into the country as well. So this is something we'd be happy to talk to you about. But I think that the key thing here is that we can look at this for small to medium-sized companies that are looking to go to India, as if you can draft behind some of these larger organizations, there's some significant opportunities. What are some of these larger organizations? What does this look like? So as an example with Walmart, we're seeing approximately $5 billion into second and third tier manufacturers throughout the country. Again, their eyes on the prize for the domestic consumption side of it, but all of that investment then is then going towards manufacturers, towards tooling them up, towards bringing them up to current standards, that then is leading to OEM products, that then is leading to opportunities for, again, these small to medium-sized groups that are overseas. Now, with that said, on the OEM side, I think we see a lot of people that ask us kind of the question, can I OEM in India? And so part of what we see is we see a diversified raw material origin. So this allows you to not necessarily be plugged into the East Asia supply chain. And so it gives you a diversification there. However, we still see a lot of subcomponents that are coming from East Asia. And so there's a lot of mix there, but we do see separate tooling that's being done in country. So this is leading to an ecosystem where we are starting to see more OEM opportunities. As an example, in the small to medium size appliance side of things, we see this as definite matches that we make for our clients. However, oftentimes if you're going into a category that's relatively new, they do require larger purchase orders. But we do believe that as this continues to move on, we'll see those purchase orders start to go down. For sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and continue on. On our product journey side of it and complexity, again, two of the areas that I would really recommend you take note of that may be different is on the validation side of things, is that India, generally speaking, you want to have a better tech pack going into the country if you want to be really successful. We have options for people that don't have tech packs. And as I mentioned, there are OEM possibilities. And so we'd be happy to talk to you about that in a greater degree. But like generally speaking, if you have a complete tech pack with a bill of material, that you'll find that there'll be a lot of people that will bid on your business. The second thing is on the logistics side, as mentioned, is that the internal logistics inside of the country tend to be much more complicated. But once you end up getting on the boat and moving and or to the aircraft, then things are fairly standard. But with that said, as I mentioned, you may be looking at, say, 1 to 2 weeks longer times. With what's going on today on the West Coast in the US, it's actually shorter, but the longer term, it will be a longer period of time. So kind of finishing up here for today, just some key considerations for the journey in India. One is that we are seeing a definite trend in Indian manufacturing with investments that are going on that are geared for internal consumption, but that's also building out the external export manufacturing capabilities. And we're seeing a greater and greater degree of large companies, MNCs, that are going to India to make this happen. Second one is, as mentioned, that it's really important to understand what the logistics situation is in India. But that said, is that especially if you're close to a port and or to another area, that you have very fast transportation that goes on. And then the final one is just that for many of you who may be looking for OEM opportunities, that India has quite a number of options. And part of this is that we're seeing products now start to diversify. And in part, what's being sold locally can then be sold for export in those OEM systems. We'd be happy to talk with you more about these in the question and answer. But generally speaking, a lot of different opportunities in India right now. It's not just an area for large, multi-billion-dollar companies. We are seeing success for small to medium-sized organizations here as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and close our time, and we'll move into a question and answer.
All right, Benjamin. If anyone has any questions that they'd like answered, feel free to put those in the Q&A or chat at this time. So initially, a question on someone that is looking to potentially move out of China, but they don't have design files. What would be the options there?
Sure. Anantveer, would you like to take that one?
Sure, Ben. Generally speaking, it depends on the product category and the industry. If you talk about heavy metals and using stainless steel or aluminum, normally we would the factories would request for at least 2D or 3D design files to get started on the quotation. Of course, the worst case is when the client has samples. Normally, either Gembah or one of our operations executives can also help the client develop these tech packs. But for a more precise quotation and estimations on your product, it's normally required to have at least 2D or a 3D render for your product.
Yeah, and for those of you who may not have a tech pack and or your design files together, Gembah offers services that we can go into, but I would say that the real key thing here is to make sure that the DFM process goes on. So design for manufacturing. This is an important one where we find that communication between the group that's doing your tech files and then the group that's going to be manufacturing it is really critical. It helps to just really clarify issues before they come up. as well as what your standards will be. So as Anantveer mentioned, one of the key things is what are your tolerances going to be on products? If something's going to be OEM'd, it's not as much of an issue. If you're doing kind of more of a product plus one strategy where you're kind of drafting off of an OEM and you have just a number of critical places, that still can help the manufacturer to really help you as a client understand where there may be specific issues and there may be changes that are going on. So again, that said, it's not required for all products, but it was certainly recommended.
All right, the next question is, how can we start to source quality, reliable clothing vendors in India?
Well, Ben, I'll take that one. So India is, like I mentioned earlier, so one of our centers of excellence in India is the southern part of India, where we have a large cluster of Gembah vetted factories that are largely export oriented, and they serve customers from large customers such as H&M, Decathlon, Gap, to a number of such high-end brands, to also medium and small level manufacturers in the US. Now, Gembah, of course, focuses on auditing these factories, understanding their MOQ requirements, and we really have a vast pool of factories offering a wide variety of MOQs that we can offer based on our clients' requirements. But from knitwear products to woven fabrics, India has options to even technical textiles. India is now quite independent in this space, and we have a number of factories that we can offer to clients depending on their MOQ requirements.
Yeah, as Anantveer mentioned there, what we found is really the technical fabrics and the availability of those technical fabrics is a key differentiator in India. And with these mills, oftentimes you can find, very vertically integrated, or highly vertically integrated organizations that are manufacturing. Whereas, for instance, in other countries, you may find that the mill is separate from the cut and sew. If that's a requirement for you, you can find organizations that are that vertically integrated. However, if you really want to get into some of the specialty work, there's been a number of sustainable products that we've seen go across that. There's a lot of really interesting options, both with multiple different product categories. So as an example, you can find things in baby wear, you can find things in sports and in exercise. As Anantveer mentioned, there's a lot of options in India within this space. But one of the key things to really understand is like, where is the fabric coming from? And are there technical pieces to this that you need to have as a consideration in your supply chain?
All right, for everyone on the line, I'll be stopping the recording here, but we're going to continue. We have about 5 more questions, continue to answer those questions.